Nobody likes watching a maritime disaster. If someone was on a cruise ship in Alaska and their ship ran aground and it was you had loss of life or you had a tragic, scary event, all because you had sounding data, water depth data that dates back to the Captain Cook era, it'd be a little frightening and aggravating. My name is Carol Jansen, and I'm the Operations Director here at the Alaska Ocean Observing System. I'm also the project lead for a project through ADAC on using vessel tracking information to update bathymetric survey maps for the state of Alaska's Arctic region. It's just basically water depth. It's really required if you're going to bring deep vessel draft ships into a harbor. You need to know what the water depths are at a very high resolution in those areas. So for the coastal waters of Alaska, a lot of that information is either lacking, so it's a major gap, or it's very low resolution and most likely old. Our job is to take historical vessel tracking information, lots of data, and break that down and distill it into information that can be used by NOAA to help prioritize where they are going to do surveys to update navigational chart information.
What we're really trying to figure out about vessel traffic is how is it changing? The Arctic itself is one of the most dynamic physical environments on the planet, and it's experiencing the most change. Every year, there's more and more of the Arctic being exposed to be traversed by ships and boats that travel in it. And so the patterns of these ships are changing, but the data is so large that it's very difficult to get a handle on how these patterns are changing. And if we don't know how these patterns are changing, we don't know how they're impacting subsistence resources. We don't know if they're going into areas of the ocean that have never been charted before because they've always been covered with ice. So there's huge risks here, just a lack of knowledge. So in order to understand the Arctic environment better, we need to collect information. The problem is that we have limited funding. We can't collect all the information that we're missing. So we need to know in a surgical way, where do we put our effort and time into charting the ocean? And the way we figure this out is where are boats going now where they weren't going before? These AIS receivers that are all over the coasts of America are collecting vessel pings. And basically a vessel is emitting a message every 6 seconds. And there are hundreds of thousands of vessels across the United States and the world. All this data comes into these receivers and ends up at the US Coast Guard. The data is huge. We're talking about hundreds of billions of records, possibly trillions of records. The magnitude of this data makes it extremely difficult to analyze. By bringing in some high-performance computing techniques, cluster computing, which is really a modern form of a supercomputer, is a cluster computer, we can bring the time to process this data down from months to years, down to hours to days. And so using more modern big data techniques, we can produce actionable information so that when the US Coast Guard is planning where they're going to be doing their bathymetric sounding to understand the seafloor better, we can provide them with information that tells them in a very, very surgical way exactly where to go sample information to have the biggest impact to reduce loss of life, oil spill catastrophes, and vessel groundings.
I've always been a fan of preventative maintenance, if you will. We're not going to stop what's changing in the Arctic. We're not going to say no ships allowed because we don't know what the bathymetry is. It's going to happen anyway. It already is happening. And so what can we do to mitigate or help prevent a maritime disaster?